Hi, and welcome to this live reading from the Irresistible Valentine Anthology. And I'll be reading from Two Hearts Reconnaissance, Two Hearts Wounded Warrior Romance Book 13 by Tamara Ferguson, and this is presented by Itsy Bitsy Book Bits. Chapter 1, Crystal Rock, Wisconsin. Creeping out from the woods bordering the edge of the Dragonfly Point Inn, Harry scrambled to reach the trail leading north. He happened to know that Jake Laughlin, the owner of the inn, lived in the house a half-mile away, and there was a cruiser he kept tied at the dock below, where the keys were usually left hidden beneath the driver's seat. It would be Harry's only possible chance of rescuing the puppies, which were about to be thrown overboard into the lake. He'd tried so hard to keep them hidden away from his foster dad, but his foster dad's son, Ned, had been suspicious of the little bit of food he'd seen Harry pocket at supper. So afterwards, Ned had followed Harry to his hiding place in one of the caves. Ned had told his dad, who'd seized Molly and her puppies immediately, and despite Harry's pleas, he'd bagged them all up, loading them onto his boat and driving toward the middle of the lake along with Ned. Harry had managed to run for all he was worth along Beach Road, knowing they would be traveling in the fishing boat under the bridge toward Crystal Rock Lake, since the house where they lived was isolated, the water near the dock murky and shallow. Rushing down the staircase toward the cruiser tied to the pier, Harry failed to notice the girl who was sitting along the edge, her bare feet dangling in the water. He halted as her eyes turned on him with obvious curiosity. "I need to use the boat. My foster dad's trying to kill my dog and her puppies." The girl's jaw dropped momentarily, but then she stood, slipping into her sandals and motioning him into the boat. "Do you know how to drive this thing?" "I do," Harry answered. "Then get in, and I'll come along to help," she answered. "The keys are still in the ignition since Jake and I just came back from a drive around the point." Harry stepped into the boat, leaving the girl to hop in on her own as he revved up the engine and shoved the throttle into gear. There. A few minutes later, Harry could make out the boat as his foster dad slung a bag overboard before continuing onward, apparently on his way to hit one of the bars he frequented daily. "I hope we can get there on time," the girl murmured, echoing Harry's thoughts. But Harry could still see the bag floating in the water. He breathed a sigh of relief, since it was the heavy-duty flexible plastic cooler that they'd used to contain the animals, because it was buoyant enough to remain near the lake's surface. Lined inside with an old towel, Harry had left the bag in the cave to serve as their bed. "It looks like they're still moving around inside the bag," the girl murmured as Harry cut the engine and prepared to jump out. Although he heard the girl gasp when he pulled off his t-shirt, Harry ignored it. Who cares if she saw the scars and bruises? Something more important was at stake right now. He couldn't lose Millie and her pups. They were all he had in the world. Sounding anxious, she said, "Please be careful." But Harry barely heard the words as he dove into the lake and swam quickly toward the bag. The bag had a zipper on top, but he was sure it would have eventually filled with water and sunk below the surface. Thank God, they'd made it on time. He just hoped Millie and her puppies had all managed to survive. Once he was able to reach for the bag, he opened the zipper on top about an inch, in case the animals needed air, slinging the bag's handle over his head and shoulder. Much to his surprise, Harry saw the cruiser slowly approaching. The girl was expertly using a single oar and slowly paddling towards them. She unfolded a small ladder that she'd pulled out from under the seat, hooking it over the side edge of the boat. But Harry had trouble climbing back into the boat with the bag. Everyone inside was scrambling like crazy, and not only was the bag heavy, but he was having trouble keeping his balance. The girl said, "See if you can lift the bag from beneath with both hands while you're waiting, and I'll grab the handle." Finally, they managed to haul the bag into the boat, and after hearing the cries of the mom, Harry unzipped the bag to check on Millie and her puppy's condition. He sighed with relief. "Are all of them actually okay?" the girl asked, sounding amazed. "It seems like they are," Harry murmured, "but now I'm not sure where I can take them to make sure that something like this doesn't happen again. The cave I had them stashed in was a place that no one really knew about. It's been my hideout since I moved here." She looked into the bag. "How many are there? 3 puppies and the mother?" "Yes," Harry answered, pursing his lips. What was he going to do? "I think that we should probably get them back to land. They're pretty frisky, as skinny as they are. I'm thinking that they might be so thin because they have worms, Harry murmured, holding the smallest one to his face and giving him a quick kiss. Harry tried not to feel embarrassed when he saw the girl was looking at him with definite sympathy. He was aware that he was nearly as skinny as the puppy he was holding, and even though he was treated with indifference by his foster parents, they were a slight improvement over the last family he'd been assigned to. Maybe we should put them back into the bag before we start up the engine. What's your name? Harry, he answered, slipping the puppy back into the bag and zipping it so the animals would still be able to breathe inside. I'm Eve, she said. I've never driven before, so I think you'd better take over the wheel. I was going to try, but I don't have a clue how to do it since I was too busy watching where you were going and not how you were driving. He was surprised, since she was obviously a member of the Laughlin family. In fact, Eve looked a lot like Danielle, Jake's wife, who'd once been famous as a Grammy Award-winning vocalist. She must have sensed his confusion. It's a long story, but I've just come to live with the Laughlins. After moving the bag with the puppies toward the center of the boat, Harry put his shirt back on and stepped behind the wheel of the boat, starting up the engine. Less than 10 minutes later, they arrived back at the dock, and Eve looked around as if she was expecting someone to be waiting. Let's go up to the house and maybe we can figure something out, she murmured. I probably need to get back to my foster parents' place, he muttered. Otherwise, they'll know something's up. But what are you going to do with the dogs? Maybe Jake will let me keep them here. Come on, let's go ask. Eve finished tying up the boat while Harry hoisted the handle of the cooler bag over his head and shoulder again, following Eve up the staircase toward the massive home overlooking the lake. Why don't you wait here in the screened-in porch, Eve suggested, continuing to walk through the open doorway which appeared to lead into a huge kitchen. I'll get the puppies some water. Okay. And pulling the bag from over his head, Harry laid it down and sat on the floor, unzipping the bag and letting Millie and her 3 pups out. Appearing with a plastic bowl filled with water, Eve smiled wanly as none other than Danielle Laughlin followed her onto the porch. There was definitely tension in the air because Eve apparently didn't feel as comfortable around Danielle as she did with Jake. Much to his surprise, and apparently Eve's as well, Danielle sat on the floor across from Harry and started petting Millie, who wiggled and jiggled, her tail waving madly. "Oh, you poor girl. We need to fatten you up, don't we?" She smiled warmly at Harry. "Your name is Harry?" "I'm Danielle." I know," Harry answered, slightly in awe. She continued, "Eve calls me Danny. You should too." "All right," Harry murmured. "What are we going to do about helping you guys?" Danielle asked, almost to herself, seeming to be staring at Harry more than the puppies. She'd obviously noticed the bruises on his arms. "I'm not going to ask what they've done to you, Harry, but I would like to know the names of your foster parents." Harry nodded his agreement with hesitance, finally answering, "My latest are Ed and Pauline Hamlin." Danielle looked thoughtful. "They live right across the bay in that swamp-like area past the bridge, don't they?" "Yes," Harry answered. "They don't maintain the property very well, and Jake and I tried to buy it from them earlier this summer, but they wouldn't accept our offer." "I know. I heard them talking about it. They wanted more money," Harry admitted. He wouldn't tell Danny that the conversation had included a bunch of cuss words about Jake and Danielle, along with a lot of yelling between Ed and Pauline, who'd wanted to accept the offer. "Since Jake and I are making Crystal Rock our permanent home, we've taken on some additional tasks in this town since we can afford it. One is the animal shelter. We're rebuilding, and we've hired a vet who regularly visits to give vaccinations and exams. Let's get these puppies and their mom over there so they can be all checked out." Harry began to panic. "Don't they put the dogs to sleep there?" Oh no, Harry," Daniel answered, laying a hand over his. "I should have explained better. We've converted the shelter into a no-kill facility. I'm not exactly proposing that we leave them there, but it's a temporary solution for you. You can visit them anytime you want." Harry blinked. Okay." Danielle heaved a sigh. "Now, we need to talk about you. Are there any other foster kids living in the Hamlins' house besides yourself?" "Yes, Amy, and she's only 6. Harry had been defending her as much as he could from Ned, but for some weird reason, Ned liked to pick on her. "How old are you, Harry?" "I'm almost 13. he answered, hearing Danielle's gasp. She growled. When's the last time you ate? Harry hung his head, feeling ashamed in front of Eve, who seemed to be listening intently from where she sat on a chair with one of the puppies in hand. Last night, I guess. Danielle looked furious. I'm going to make lunch, which you're going to sit down and eat with us, and then I'm going to make some calls. I have some friends who were only talking about this last week, but they might be willing to be your foster parents. And their house is huge, even though it needs a lot of work. Jake and I are also both members of the town council, and coincidentally, we've been looking into the foster care program. The local program is obviously in need of a huge overhaul. I'm not very experienced at being a mom. Yet, she murmured, glancing at Eve. But I know until Eve is more comfortable, I'd better not offer to have you here. Besides, I think I'm better at coordinating the program than recruiting families for now. Oh, I don't know about that, Eve said quietly. You're saying everything that I hoped Jake would say if he'd been here. Danielle stilled, tears gathering in her eyes as she studied Eve, and standing as she patted Eve on the hand. Can the two of us finally have that talk a little later? Yes, Eve answered, heaving a sigh. There's a lot I want to know. Me too, sweetheart, Danielle answered, squaring her shoulders as she headed into the kitchen. Harry looked at Eve curiously. Are you a foster kid too? I was, Eve answered, seeming to come to a decision as she laid the puppy back on the floor. Until Jake found me. Found you? I guess it's all right for me to tell you. She's been giving me my space, and I haven't given her a chance, even though I've been living here for a couple months now. You mean Danielle? Danny? Harry was puzzled. Why's that? I was bitter, thinking I was unwanted. Eve's eyes met his. Danny is my birth mother. Although he'd noticed the strong resemblance, Harry was still surprised. She must have had you when she was really young. Probably, Eve answered, obviously embarrassed. I don't really know much yet, which is my fault for not wanting to talk about it. Danielle came through the doorway, carrying a dog bowl filled with canned food. It's a sure sign that Ralph is becoming deaf, Danielle said dryly. He didn't even hear me opening the food. He's our black lab, who's a little over 12 years old now. I was wondering about that, Eve said, smiling, watching Millie and the puppies attacking the food before Danielle laid the bowl completely on the floor. He loves it when Eve takes him for a walk, but he's exhausted afterwards, Danielle admitted. Okay, I've got some burgers going. Come on inside and eat, guys. The dogs will be fine out here with the tile floor, since I'm sure they're going to need some training before they're housebroken. All right, Harry answered, standing and following Danielle and Eve into the kitchen. Chapter 2. Eve gave Danielle a side glance as the three of them sat at the kitchen island, eating their burgers. This is really good, Harry said, biting into a second burger and finishing it before continuing. Just feel guilty that Amy isn't here eating with us. Well, I did manage to make a quick call about you and Amy while I was cooking the burgers, Danielle confessed. I was hoping that we could do something about your living situation right away, so I spoke with Jake. At that moment, Eve heard the sound of Jake's truck pulling into the garage. Oh, good. There's Jake now. Danielle stood, walking toward the hallway leading into the garage. A few minutes later, Danielle came back into the kitchen, followed by Jake, who was carrying a crying little girl in his arms. The girl peered into the kitchen and, obviously recognizing Harry, scrambled from Jake's arms as he laid her feet on the floor and ran towards Harry, who scooped her onto his lap while she continued to cry. Standing and resting her on the stool he'd been sitting on, Harry murmured, Don't be scared, Amy. Look, I'm eating hamburgers. Go ahead and have something to eat. Danielle approached the refrigerator, pulling out a tray of additional hamburger patties she'd left on a shelf. You can finish your burger, Harry, and I'll cook one for you, Amy, while Eve grabs you a glass of milk. She was all alone in that house, Jake growled, grabbing a couple plates from inside the cupboard cabinet. That's strange, Harry said. Pauline wasn't there? Danielle motioned at Jake. By the way, Jake, this is Harry, the boy I was telling you about. Hi, Harry, Jake said, approaching and squeezing Harry reassuredly on the shoulder. I think I might have scared your foster mom away. I have a feeling the agency must have contacted her right before I arrived to have a little talk with her. If the car wasn't in the driveway, then she was probably gone, Harry admitted. Jake asked abruptly. So they leave you alone a lot? I'm almost 13, so I'm old enough to take care of her, Harry said, sounding defensive. Usually she doesn't leave Amy alone, but they have a police radio and they listen to it all the time to see when there's trouble. I called Sam Danielson, the police chief here in town, and asked for an escort, so you're probably right. Sam must have radioed the deputy who met us there. Eve watched the expression on Jake's face soften. I've been exactly where you are, Harry. I understand more than you know. Harry hung his head. Right now, you two shouldn't worry about a thing. Danny and I have the situation under control. There's no doubt in our minds that the two of you aren't being cared for properly in the foster system. We're having your foster parents investigated, and we've got a restraining order in the works. Danny and I have some friends coming over as soon as they can, and we're sure they're going to want to take the two of you home, but I want you to know that you'll both be welcome here as well if you need us for anything. But what about our stuff? Harry asked, looking distressed. We don't have much, but Amy has a bear that she likes to sleep with, otherwise she can't. Amy finally spoke. Ned took my Baba. He won't give him back. Jake looked at Amy first and then at Danielle before turning back to Harry. Come on, I'll drive you over there and you can go inside and round up anything you want. Danny, have you got a few bags Harry can use for packing their stuff? Sure, Danielle answered. Amy, Harry and Jake are going back to the house to get your bear. They'll both be back soon. You don't mind staying with Eve and I, do you? By that time, Amy was eating her hamburger and she barely looked up when she nodded her agreement. Eve nearly smiled.